Okay, so we are going to take a look at photosynthesis. And the purpose of this screencast is to be just what's the purpose of photosynthesis? And then we're also going to briefly outline the inputs and outputs of the two stages of photosynthesis. It happens in two stages. So, this first one, outlining the purpose of photosynthesis, well, plants need food. They need food to make energy to do cell processes. Plants, just like animals, carry out cell respiration. They take food and they convert it to ATP energy that can be used to drive cellular work. Now, plants don't eat their food, they make their food. So they don't consume it, right? They make it through photosynthesis. And so they're going to take carbon dioxide and water and use sunlight energy to take all those molecules of carbon dioxide, water, and everything and build them into like a glucose molecule or some sort of food for the plant. And so that's how plants will eventually have food that they can then, through cell respiration, convert to ATP to drive cellular work. And that whole process is going to happen in two stages. It's, you think it'd be awesome if they could just take light energy and do cell processes, or just take light, but we need photosynthesis because we got to make food. And so that going from carbon dioxide into glucose is going to take a couple of steps because we got to make the energy and then convert it. So we're going to go over those two steps. But before I start those steps, I'm just going to show you where this is happening in the plant. So here's the leaf. And if you take a cross section of that leaf, you can see there's a whole bunch of cells here. And those cells have these little, each one of these cells, right? You can see these are the ones that are called mesophyll cells. And if you look at one close under a micrograph, inside a mesophyll cell, there's a whole bunch of chloroplasts. And the chloroplasts themselves, if you look at this little cartoon of it, are made up of a few different parts. Now, the ones we're going to focus on are the thylakoid membranes. So you see these stacks here, they look like pancakes. Those are called thylakoids. A whole stack of them together get called a granum, but we'll generally be using the term thylakoid. And then outside and surrounding them is a fluid called the stroma. It's kind of like the cytoplasm of the chloroplast. And you can see they also have two membranes. You should be able to recognize a chloroplast in an electron micrograph, and that's what this looks like. Okay, so let's look at the two stages. Just this is a preview. There's going to be pictures, so don't stress. But I'm going to tell you, it consists of what we call the light reactions and the Calvin cycle. Another name for the Calvin cycle is the light independent reaction. So we've got the light dependent and the light independent reactions. And those light reactions, the ones that depend on light, essentially what's going to happen is the plant is going to take water and light. They're going to split water and with light, and it's going to make a whole bunch of ATP and NADPH, which is an electron carrier. Okay. And this is where oxygen will be released in that process of photosynthesis. And then here's the Calvin cycle. This is the light independent reactions. This happens in the stroma, and that's where all of this energy of ATP and electron carriers is going to be used to convert carbon dioxide into sugars. Okay, so essentially we're in the light independent reactions, the Calvin cycle, we're going to take carbon dioxide and incorporate that into organic molecules such as glucose. So let's look at those pictures. Okay, so water, right, is going to enter the chloroplast, and with light, it's going to split that water in the light reactions. This is at the thylakoid, that's the location, and that's what goes into it. So the light reactions take water and light, okay, and then it's going to convert that water, it's going to split it, oxygen gets released, and in that process, ATP gets made and NADPH gets made. The NADPH is an electron carrier, which can generate energy to help later. Okay, so the inputs, light splits water, we get a byproduct of oxygen, and then ATP and NADPH is formed. The light independent reactions, the Calvin cycle, it's going to take that ATP and the NADPH, so that's the inputs to the Calvin cycle, along with carbon dioxides. It's going to use this energy to take these carbon dioxides and put them together to make like a glucose molecule. Okay, so that's what's going to come out of that. So the inputs are ATP and NADPH and carbon dioxide, and the outputs is some sort of carbohydrate. It could be a 3-carbon sugar or a glucose. And then other outputs is just that the ADP, because it's been oxidized, then it's going to be reused in the light reaction, and then the NADPH also oxidized will be reused in the light reaction. So you can see the NADP pluses and ADPs go back to the light reactions to get used over and over again. So these two stages depend on each other because these light reactions wouldn't happen if they couldn't oxidize these guys. Okay. Or if they couldn't reduce them. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to mention is that there wasn't always a whole bunch of oxygen on the planet. And we know here, oxygen's a big byproduct of photosynthesis. Well, about 2.7 billion years ago was the oxygen revolution. And these guys, these are stromatolites. And we think that these are also like a type of cyanobacteria, that it's a colony of a whole bunch of single-celled photosynthesizing organisms. And they started photosynthesizing, which was great because there was plenty of carbon dioxide in the water at the time, just not a lot of oxygen. And they could take that carbon dioxide in sunlight and convert it into food. So it turns out that the O2 that we're breathing is actually biological in origin. And so at first, the oxygen produced by the early cyanobacteria was probably absorbed in the water. And that actually dissolved the iron, and it caused iron to precipitate, and the oceans turned bright red. But then eventually, enough of that iron precipitated out, and then the oxygen was just dissolved into the ocean, and then it started to gas out into the atmosphere. So then all of a sudden, we have all this O2 increasing in the atmosphere. So it went from about 10% of today's levels. So now it's around 21%. And the new oxygen levels, that drove evolution. This is kind of one of those things that we think probably drove a lot of the endosymbiotic reactions, right? Where you've got organisms that then could tolerate the oxygen that was in there, and those mitochondria ended up getting, like that symbiotic relationship between them and eukaryotic cells. So there was a lot of organisms that went extinct this time because they couldn't handle the oxygen. So if you remember way back to 1.5 and the endosymbiotic theory, this is kind of where that comes from. So one thing that's important to know is that living organisms can actually change the biotic or the abiotic factors on the planet. So living organisms can actually change the makeup of the atmosphere.